There is no war in the kingdom, just the unmasking of masks. That's a sentiment that I want to start with in today's video, as we're going to talk a bit about the current narratives out there on the global stage, especially regarding disclosure and certain things that are coming to light. Because for many, this is a time that they've been waiting for and hoping for such a long time. The disclosure, the release, the truth coming to the surface, and it's synonymous with where we are headed cosmically and culturally. It's no surprise that these things are coming to the surface now. And so I don't want to take away from people's reaction, their disgust and emotional response to a lot of this revelation, because a lot of that is completely understandable. And I certainly don't want to bypass the gravity of some of these things either. But as you all know, if you watch my videos, this channel here is about helping us remain rooted in God and making sure that we keep our eyes on Him and stay in faith throughout some of the more turbulent scenes that unfold. Because a lot of what we're experiencing, many of us will have been waiting for and known the quality of before it's even come to the surface. So we have an expectation, we have a narrative arriving, and whilst we might look at that as evidence that the world is moving into darker, more sinister places, what it's actually doing is showing us that that dark, sinister energy can no longer be hidden and is coming to the surface for divine reason. And that's a good lens to look at, because it needs to come out. Just like when we have toxicity in the body, it needs to come to the surface and be purged. And we are living in the collective body of the Mother Earth, and so anything that is not rooted in God, that is not sanctified, that is not built on the foundations of law and morality, virtue, innocence, is all going to come to the surface to be purged. And we see the gross expressions of that in some of these more shocking revelations on the global stage, but we also must be willing to look at how that's playing out for us all individually as well, because there is a connection there, and that's what I want to talk to a bit about in this video. Many people will look at what's going on with the content being released and talk about Satanism, Luciferianism, the devil, ritualistic abuse and all these things, and quite rightly so. But what I want to get into today is looking at the core of that, because when you understand the core of it, you understand the expression at its current level. And as you probably can imagine, where I'm going to go straight away is to say that the core issue that we are looking at in terms of the turbulence, chaos and drama that's unfolding on the planet right now is a collective forgetfulness of our relationship to God. And you could say that that really represents archetypally the devil's, Lucifer's satanic story, is this need to be separate, this need to exalt oneself above God. And so Lucifer, at its most subtle level, the Luciferic spell is anything that is taking us from the seat of presence and distracting us and putting us on the chessboard of good and evil. And that's where we're at today. And so we see the extremities of that in some of these events, and that's how we're all reacting. Many people are still attached to getting their truth proven. But what's often missed is our next step in that process, which is looking back with honest reflection at our own walk and how we ourselves let ourselves get distracted, how our attention gets bought into narratives and disclosure and things out there that are simply keeping us engaged in a my truth, your truth, good and evil, light and dark, adversarial system. And so Lucifer's first trick is to keep you from presence and knowing yourself in God. And I'm not coming on here to even blame or judge the Luciferic energy, because at its core it's still got its own function, which is mirroring mirroring. And that's such an important word, because we are living in a hall of mirrors. And that isn't to say that if you react to the abuse of a child, that you have also abused a child. But there is something in there to reveal to us about where we have lost our innocence and how we perceive our need for longevity, vitality, youthfulness. Because that is a problem that we see on the collective, is the industry, the culture, society is geared towards how to maintain youth, how to outrun life, how to stay younger, how to stay vital and escape mortality. And again, why? Because we have forgotten that we are immortal, that we have been given eternal life through the breath of God, which is never not moving through us minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. So we already have been given eternal life, but we have forgotten that. And so that forgetfulness has led us into certain practices which have become grosser and grosser and grosser until eventually they reach their most gross level. They come to the surface to be revealed, and then we are reacting to that, quite rightly, as I say, but it doesn't go any further than that. It stops at the reaction. And as I've said before, we are living in an energetic realm that is governed by law. And so I talk about that because it helps us actually navigate the experience with more clarity and also more purpose. Because if we just get lost in emotion and don't understand how the law is working in all this, then it means that we are at risk of repeating these patterns. And if you look at history, that's all we've done. We have caught the bad guys, we've chopped their heads off, we've done whatever we needed to do, and then inevitably the same struggle, the same separational games have played themselves out until eventually there is a moment of revelation and disclosure, and then it all begins again. So we have an opportunity this time to do it differently, but it requires our willingness to have an honest look about the way that we are dealing with life here. Because it's one thing to get angry and say, I told you so, about the disclosure. But it's another step further to go into revelation. And they're not the same thing. Revelation is the inner work where the soul is engaged in meeting their maker. And we have to be aware of how our attention is being siphoned off into narratives and stories about things that we also have no personal experience of, which ultimately distracts us from our ability to know ourselves in God. And that's the subtle message that I want to really hit on in this video, is that is where the game of power starts. What is distracting you from that knowing? Because if you had that, you would be able to remain seated in the presence of the Holy Witness, look at what is going on through the eyes of law, and understand what is the most harmonious response that I can give here. Because beyond my anger, beyond my reaction, there needs to be some change in me. There needs to be some change that takes place. Because the things that we see presented in its grossest form on the television and on YouTube and in the media are playing themselves out in the households and lives of everybody on this planet. And that's the point that we miss. So we look at the people who are stealing the innocence of children and want to react so angrily to that. But there is a deeper question in all this about how we are relating to innocence, how we have had our own innocence taken, or we've stolen our own innocence or that of others, So that's just a short reflectional prompt that I want to offer about all this, because the game that many are lost in is the spell of duality, and it's a necessary function of unity, but it also leads a lot of people into forgetting that God is still in control, and we don't need to follow through the law of cause and effect, the law of correspondence, because it takes place on its own. And right now, what's needed more than anything is the ability to see distortion as it is, not add more fluff to it, and let it move on, and also look at how we can make adjustments in our walk to make sure that we ourselves are not feeding these patterns, these subtle patterns that end up moving into more gross expressions. Because we are, whether we like it or not, living in a system of oneness. And what that means is that I have to be responsible to everybody with the way that I am thinking, the way that I am speaking, the way that I'm acting, because everything I do affects everybody else. So what is the quality of the energy with which I am engaging creation? It always has to come back to that. Again, I am not judging anybody's response to some of this information, but what I am suggesting is that we be mindful of how our need to be right and our need to say I told you so often far outweighs our ability then to look at how we can show up more reverently, with more morality and virtue in this world, because that's what this is asking us to look at. Everything presents an opportunity for the individual to know themselves more profoundly. And so behind that reaction, behind that emotional response, what is there to learn about the patterns of nature, the laws that govern creation, and how we as individuals and collectives have moved through that to get us to this point? Because that's what it's all about. The pressure, the distortion, the ugliness, the vileness, it's all that coming to the surface to be seen by God's holy gaze, not to sit in judgment forever, but to allow the unconditional presence of the Holy Witness to come forward and say, I see it as it is, and I'm not going to add drama to an already bubbling pot. I need to be able to take a step back and look at this with clarity so that I can understand what actually is the most beneficial response, not just for me, but for everybody. Because we're overlooked that, because we're so enraged and entitled by our rage. We disguise it as virtue, you know, and often for many, it's a way to deflect from the gaze of the soul, which wants to know, what are you holding that you don't need to hold anymore? So these things, when they come to the surface, they offer a profound opportunity for us to reflect more deeply on how humanity has got to this and what it really began with. And as I said at the beginning, and I will maintain in all my videos, is the belief in separation from God. Because if we instill that now and we live that regardless of what's going on in the collective, that will be our offering, that will be our divine imprint on creation. Whether we like it or not, everything we do affects everybody else. And so that core truth is enough to make me think I've got to be careful about the way I am using my words and the way that I am using my emotions and my creative life force to affect reality. Because we want coherence, we want harmony. And living in a soup of I told you so, I'm right, you're wrong, my truth, your truth, it doesn't actually get us anywhere. It just creates the framework for more of this to unfold. And then we end up stuck in a dopamine loop of I told you so. Because the more comes to the surface, we want more. We want more revelation. We want everyone to know everything. But it's not going to work like that. So we can get frustrated at people calling them NPCs and thinking, what are they doing? They're so asleep. But people, not a lot of people really need to know this stuff. You know, it doesn't need to be shared and seen by everybody, because a lot of people have already moved to that point of living in a life of compassionate understanding, morality, integrity, and making that their primary focus. God, how do I walk in God? So look at Yeshua. If you want to look at a way to walk, look at Yeshua, because you'll see in that he wasn't against anything. Yes, he had his moments of calling out hypocrisy, which we all should do, and I guess I'm doing that as well. But ultimately, he had compassion for everybody because he understood them through the gaze of God, through law, through cause and effect. And that's where we're at. We are at the extremities of the effects of causes that were seeded a long, long time ago. And so the most gross forms of shadow and distortion are rising to the surface to be purified. But if we react with aggression, with hate, with separational mindsets, we do not resolve that. We only keep it going and festering under the surface until it pops up somewhere else later on. And we all deep down know that. Deep down we all know that. We know the core reasoning why we're in the world that we're in now. We know that you can't fight fire with fire. We know that hate doesn't fix hate. It's energy. Energetically, mathematically obvious that if we want to resolve hatred and disgusting behaviour, that disgust and hate are not the antidote. So what is the balancing force? We all know that love is the only law, really. And I don't mean that in some kumbaya passive way. Love is, to be unconditionally loving takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of commitment to be able to look through the eyes of God when you are faced with some of these more disgusting themes. It takes a lot to be able to step back from that and look through the eyes of unconditional love. So please don't think that the sentiment I'm offering is to just say, kumbaya, it's all okay. It's not. It's to be able to put our emotions aside for a moment and understand what it is that we need to do in the realm of law to get this balanced again. Because it is not reaction. It is not forever punishment and vitriol of hate and judgment. It is moving beyond that to say, right, how are we going to ensure that the foundation of everything that we create moving forward cannot allow that kind of energy to permeate and start to root and grow? What's the answer? It's obvious. God. So I try and keep things as simple as I can on this channel, because it is quite simple. When you put God first, when you're obedient to God, life reflects that. So if it isn't reflecting that, it's because we haven't done that. And so the solution is obvious. And it's not about waiting for everybody else to do it and to realize. It's about you taking up your shepherd's crook now and walking, and trusting that you will meet who you need to meet through resonance, through walking your talk, through giving God your spine and walking upright in faith with him, and knowing that you will be that for everybody else. That's where we're going. So great that we've got some revelation, but don't let it distract you from the true walk, which is back into the kingdom.